Hello and welcome to PsychBoost. In this video we'll be looking at social learning theory. This is a development of the original learning theories by Pavlov and Skinner. What we're going to do is we're going to define key aspects of social learning theory and discuss some detail research by a psychologist called Bandura. There'll be specialist terminology to learn such as mediational processes, and we'll mention some ways we can evaluate the social learning approach to psychology.
1, 2, 3.
Let's have a look at some of the key assumptions that social learning theory has. Well, when it comes to learning, social learning theory develops from the other learning approaches by highlighting the fact that learning for humans takes place in a social context. We learn from exposure to other people's behaviour. These other people act as models for our own behaviour. And these can be real people, so these are live models, or they can be symbolic models. Symbolic models are people you might see on TV or movie characters. How much we identify with the model is going to influence the likelihood of whether we're going to imitate them or not. So we're going to look for characteristics that are similar to our own, such as gender, age, education, ethnicity, and the models we relate to most closely are more likely to be imitated. In common with the other learning theorists, reinforcement and punishment play a role. Behaviours are more likely to be repeated if they are rewarded directly. But importantly, a social learning theory is interested in observation of models. If a model is observed being rewarded, we're more likely to repeat that behaviour ourselves. And this is called vicarious reinforcement. The observation of someone else's reward leading us to behave like them. So in the reverse, behaviours are less likely to be repeated if they're punished directly, or we see a model being punished. So this would be vicarious punishment. So what's the main difference between social learning theory and the learning theorists we spoke about in the previous video? Social learning theory suggests there are internal mental processes, while the other learning theories totally disregarded the idea that there are internal mental processes. But these cognitions are important for social learning theorists, and they suggest these processes must be present in order for learning to happen. These learning processes are called mediational factors. There are 4 of them, and we'll discuss them one by one. Mediational factors are mental cognitive processes, so thought processes. They need to take place between the stimulus, the model, and the response, the behaviour. So these mental processes happen in the mind. So number 1, attention. Of course, to learn from a model, we need to have actually paid attention to the model behaviour. If we didn't see it, we can't imitate it. Certain factors are going to make it more or less likely for us to pay attention. So just for example, how interesting the model is. Or maybe the cognitive ability of the observer to pay attention without getting distracted. As well as paying attention to the behaviour actually has to be remembered. If the observer forgets that they've seen the observed behaviour, they're not going to imitate it. Of course, some behaviours are quite complex and aren't easy to remember. If these aren't retained, they're not going to be repeated. So we might see a behaviour, we might be able to remember seeing it happen, but what we also need is the motivation to actually imitate the behaviour. This is based on anticipated rewards for carrying out the behaviour or possible punishments, and this is going to influence whether we decide to imitate it or not. Finally, reproduction. Some behaviours we might just not be skillful enough to repeat, or we might not have the resources. So here's an example on the right hand side. Here's a young girl, I'll call her Kate, and Kate has seen Alice punch Billy for his sweets. Now in this scenario, Alice gets to keep the sweets. So first of all, Kate just sees, Alice punched Billy for his sweets. She's paid attention. She then retains this information. I've just seen Alice punch Billy to get his sweets. So she's seen it. She's remembered it. Motivation. I want sweets. She sees a possible reward. Alice punched Billy. She got his sweets. She wants sweets as well. That's enough motivation. Reproduction. Is she able to reproduce the behaviour? I'm bigger than Alice. I can punch her for the sweets. So we can see in this mediational chain of thoughts, Kate has paid attention, she's remembered what she's seen, she has the motivation to reproduce the behaviour, and she has the ability as well. Now, one point to make, learning and performance aren't actually the same. Kate might have learned that to get the sweets, she could punch Alice, but the performance, punching Alice, isn't necessary for Kate to have learnt the lesson. Maybe Kate's going to hold fire for a while. Maybe next week or next month, she'll enact what she learned. The information has been processed, it's been internalised for use at a later time, but this time isn't now. And we can see from this a difference between the old learning theories, and social learning theory. The old learning theory would just look at inputs, the stimulus, and an immediate output, a behaviour. In this approach, the behaviour can be removed in time quite a way from the original learning. It doesn't have to be demonstrated straight away. We're now going to look at some of the research on social learning theory. The classic research on this section is by Albert Bandura. So in 1961, Bandura got 72 3 to 5 year old children, 36 male, 36 female. And they either watched a filmed adult attacking a Bobo doll, so hitting, punching, kicking this inflatable toy, or they watched the adult play neutrally in the room with the Bobo doll there, but not beating the Bobo doll at all. Or a third group, which is a no model, they didn't get to see an adult interacting with the toys at all, a control group. All of the children's aggression was measured before the study started, and the groups were created to make sure that there are equal levels of aggression within each group. This means they followed a matched pairs design. They matched each child's aggression level with each group so they were all equal, because of course it would have been unfair to have the most aggressive children in one of the groups. So before they were put in the room with the Bobo doll, all the children in each of the three groups were given mild aggression arousal. What happened to them is they were placed in a room with some quite nice toys, but they were told that the toys were for some other children, and they weren't allowed to play with them. After being annoyed like this, they were then taken to the Bobo doll room. So what did Bandura find? He found that the children who had observed the adult playing aggressively would then go on to imitate these aggressive behaviours. So the hitting, the punching, and even some of the verbal abuse that was used. The group, however, that had watched the adult playing neutrally with the toys were not aggressive. This effect, where the children had seen the adult playing aggressively with the Bobo doll, was actually stronger if the children observed an adult of the same gender as them interacting with the Bobo doll. And this suggests identification. There was a variation of this study which looked at vicarious reinforcement. So in this variation, children observed adults being rewarded by being praised for their aggressive behaviour, and then they were more likely to imitate the behaviour than those children who'd watched adults punished for behaving aggressively with the Bobo doll. So this whole area of research does suggest that children will learn their behaviours by watching others' behaviour and modelling their own behaviour off them. So that's social learning theory. Let's have a look at some evaluations. One problem with social learning theory is it does have a problem demonstrating cause and effect, that any given behaviour is due to a social learning process. Bandura's research was well run. He controlled his variables well, and he did demonstrate that behaviour was imitated. But this wasn't a real life situation, and it's much harder to show direct cause and effect in real life, often because the time between learning a behaviour from watching a model to actually carrying it out could be days, weeks or months. Now, one advantage that social learning theorists have over the behaviourists is they don't rely as much on animal research. Social learning theorists look at consciousness and ideas about internal mental processes and rationality. This simply couldn't have been looked at in the animal studies by Pavlov and Skinner, who ignored these internal mental processes completely. Another evaluation is social learning theory can explain displays of basic behaviours, such as aggression once it's been modelled. But of course, as we grow up, we learn more complex ideas than aggression. We learn abstract concepts like justice. It's hard to see how we learn that from social learning theory processes. And a final evaluation. Social learning theory sees behaviour as environmentally determined. However, some behaviours, they might be innate. You might be born with certain behaviours. And these behaviours might be better explained by perhaps biological explanations. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a like. If you haven't already, click subscribe to be updated with new videos. And also, if you have any questions about the content covered during this video, please drop a comment in the comments below. If you see a question and you think you can answer it, then please give that a go as well. Thank you very much. Until the next episode of PsychBoost.